Welcome to the Future Worlds podcast. Future Worlds is the on-campus startup accelerator at the University of Southampton. And today we're going to be talking about we're going to go through a load of questions that we've received from followers on the podcast, but also going to be looking at the whole question of communication around startups and communication for startup founders. But before that, Alice, you regularly meet with aspiring startup founders on campus. What are some of the kind of questions, the doubts, maybe the fears that they have when they first meet with you?
Yeah, it's all about the bigger picture. You see it a lot with PhD students, I think, because sometimes they get guided through what they're doing by their supervisors. And so they do things, but they don't understand why they're doing them. And that becomes, quickly very easy to see when you ask somebody, what's the point of, why do you do this every single day? And they're like, actually, I'm not entirely sure. And I think it makes it harder as well, because how can you really be passionate about something, and how can you have the energy every day to go and work on it if you're not really truly invested in the reason behind it?
Yeah, there's a real thing, isn't there, of having that vision of this is where it goes. This is what it can achieve. And so many of the great startups start with a niche thing, but the founders have got some kind of vision of, okay, well, we start here, but actually what it can lead to is this thing that can be epic scale and huge transformation. You never know if you're going to get there until you've actually reached it. But starting with that kind of vision of, okay, this is the potential of this thing.
I think one of the big things is a lot of people are maybe undergraduates, and so they don't have a lot of money. So if you're thinking about starting up, you're like, well, how am I actually going to fund this project? It might be small things that you need to buy, but you can't afford to hire a team or anything like that. So it's around, how can you maybe bootstrap your way through? So it's always a question of what are some of the ways that actually, when you're really early stage and you can't be asking venture capital firms for investment, but how can you be finding those smaller pots of money to start out?
And what are some of the kind of ways that the founders that you talk to, what are some of the ways that they can find the bits of money that they need to get started?
So I think I just said bootstrapping. So what I mean by that is kind of any means necessary. So I think it's like friends, family, and fools. And I think it's not meant to sound, actually negative. Like that is a really good way of getting some initial funding, is to ask, people around you, use your savings. I think people are sometimes reluctant to use their own money, but really when you're starting out, that's, what you have to do is part of the risk that you take.
So one of the bits of advice I'd give people is being really careful on the friends, family, and fools, because it's called fools because typically people lose their money at that kind of stage. Like it's really high risk. And I've certainly seen, and I've been kind of involved when you've got people from family and friends that give money into a startup, invest, lend, whatever it looks like, and don't really understand the risk that they're getting involved with. And that can lead to so much tension and friction that actually, for a startup founder, raising money from friends and family can be so risky, because you end up losing relationships that are lifelong relationships for an endeavor that may or may not work. But the reality is at the beginning, it's really high risk.
So what else could you potentially do when you're really early stage? Where could you look for smaller pots of money?
Yeah, so I think OPM, other people's money, always look at ways that you can get other people's money. And there's a whole range of things that you can do. So in a university context, there's often pockets of funding to help people to try and do a startup, whether it's at the student level or the researcher level, just finding some of those pockets to lash something together. But also, often money is seen as the biggest inhibitor of a startup. So people think, because I don't have money, I can't do this thing. But actually, often that's a really false excuse. What are the things you can do for free? What are the ways that you could test it? If not free, then really cheaply. Look at some of those things before immediately jumping to, because I don't have the money, I can't start. And until I've got the money, I won't do anything. That sounds a lot like an excuse. I mean, what are some of the ways that you've seen people hustling through without the money, but finding a way of getting started?
Yeah, so I had a really good example talking to a founder the other day who looking to build a prototype, and actually, it can be really hard because you want to have something to show people to demonstrate what it is that you've got, but actually building a prototype is going to take money. And so instead of perhaps thinking about, really scale manufacturers or people that are looking to manufacture your products in thousands, actually maybe go to B&Q and see what you can build in the garage or with things that you find around the house. It sounds silly, but when you're thinking about your minimum viable product, all you really need to be able to do is demonstrate the concept to someone. And actually, if that means that you can build it out of MDF, then that's fine.
So we're based in an engineering faculty surrounded by brilliant technical people. A lot of the challenge that comes in the VC industry is about pipeline, diversity of talent and startup founders coming through. The engineering disciplines often male dominated, not so many women coming into those disciplines in the first place. And those disciplines are so key to then launching so many of the startups that we see coming through. You've been involved in outreach into schools, and that's one of the ways in which you can broaden the pipeline of talent coming into STEM subjects. What's been your experience of working in that context?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely so important because even at university, you're already reaching people quite late in their life of already having made the decision to study certain subjects and to be doing a degree. So I think to be going into schools is you've got this people, their minds are more malleable, they're younger, they're more open to new things. And actually it's an opportunity to get them excited about something. Because I think the key to all of these things is, I say about doing a PhD, and I think it's the same for founding a startup. You have to work on something that you're hugely passionate about because it's hard work. And if you don't have the motivation because you think it is incredibly important, you won't survive till the end.
And of course, when you're communicating to school children, that's at a very different level to the PhD study you were doing. How did you find that experience?
Yeah, so interestingly, I had a slight change of field going into my PhD than I did for my undergrad. So when I started doing outreach, I was doing some electronics workshops and I was talking about fiber optics. And these are actually not things that I knew a huge amount about when I started. So for me, I actually learned an incredible amount through teaching others. And it's interesting because you have to have such a deep level of understanding of something to actually be able to communicate it in an incredibly simple way. But it's really, really valuable experience. And I think actually that, I was very outside of my comfort zone doing that, but it really helps increase your confidence as well, speaking to other people. And it gives you good validation when people are actually listening to you. And it does, it just helps you feel like, I do know what I'm talking about, so I can do this. And I think part of the pitching, I think we see it a lot with some of the founders that have never done anything like that before, is you're just nervous and you lack confidence. And so for them, it's just about building them up and helping them to see that this is something that they can easily do with a little bit of practice. So
what's one of your favourite examples from outreach?
So one of my favourite examples, actually, I have two, if that's allowed. So the first one was we had a class and they were about 15-year-olds, maybe we're doing electronics workshop. And there was one girl that she just didn't want to be there. She didn't want to do it. And so she was just on her phone playing around. And I was like, look, I'm not your teacher. I don't care what you do, really. If you want to sit on your phone for an hour, that's absolutely fine. But why don't you just give it a go while you're here? Because that might be more fun. And very reluctantly, she was like, okay, fine, and sort of starts looking at it. And then by the end of the session, she's like, comes running up to me to show me what she'd done, be like, look, I did it. And she was so, she'd really surprised herself. And I was like, I told you could do it. And it's just about giving people the opportunity to realize their potential. And I think one of my other favorites is I went down to a school in Weymouth and we were working with this class and they were, I think, like the naughty class. So the teacher was very pleased when we came in to give him the afternoon off. And we were working again, I think it was like electronics workshop with them. And the teacher comes up to me at the end and says, they've never sat still and concentrated on anything for so long before. And I think it was just giving kids the opportunity to do something different and to learn on their own. And it's not everyone's style, but, to just be able to play with something and figure out how it works or, okay, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? It's just such an opportunity that they don't get in everyday school lessons.
And that's one of the challenges, I think, in terms of tech startups, that it's centered on tech. It needs those skills. And so many children coming through school don't recognize how valuable those skills are, or perhaps feel excluded and have the opportunity to learn some of those. So when you go in and you do those outreach sessions and you give that 15-year-old girl the knowledge that actually she can do this stuff, this isn't just something that other people do, that can make such a difference and potentially a startup founder in the making.
I think it's also about people realize, they don't associate the tech that they're doing or the science they learn about at school with being a startup founder. So it's about helping them understand the skills that they learn, how they can later apply it. Because if you say to somebody, oh, well, you could be an engineer, what do you think that means? And they'll show you pictures of, I don't know, men with cars or, bridges or building buildings or something. And they can't see beyond that because actually nobody tells them that there are so many other options if you learn these skills that you can go on and do, pretty much anything you want.
Yeah, and you definitely see that, don't you? With like Silicon Valley, like so many of the great startups that have been founded by brilliant technical people, by the engineers who have got a passion for whatever it is, like the technology they're working on. And that passion, that interest has then fueled the startup journey they've been on. And I do think it's tragic how few of the teenagers that are coming through these days connect those skills with potentially incredible outcomes, like the glory, the fame, the riches that go with that success that so many people chase through celebrity, like go on Love Island, become a Premiership footballer. Like, okay, but actually there's this whole world that is accessible by learning maths and being really good at maths and working on physics and engineering, like all of those skills that often are seen as the boring subjects or seen as the things that only the nerds do, but actually helping people see, no, this is a pathway to some incredible outcomes.
Are you going to be on the next series of Love Island then? Is that what you were trying to tell me?
Did you not know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a really good way that you can do that is by showing people with case studies with some of the founders that come through and talking about their journeys and actually helping for people to relate to them, to say, actually, they went to university, they did science, and now look where they are, And I think that's just about the storytelling, which is something that maybe gets a little bit lost sometimes.
Yeah, that motivation is so important, and it's so often overlooked, I think, in terms of the startup journeys, the big stories, the great billionaire founders, is actually the starting point was they were just passionate about something. They had this fire in their belly about X, and that's what pushed them to then invest all their time and their effort. And we see it, don't we? Time and time again, we get these people coming through. Some of the ideas are nuts, like completely ridiculous, but they're really passionate about this area or this thing that they've been working on, and it makes such a difference.
Yeah, I think if someone can tell you their sort of out of the box idea, but actually by the end of the conversation, you're convinced that it's feasible, you think, actually, yeah, you've made me feel passionate about this because you are. And I think that's why it's so nice to work with the people that we do, because it's really contagious, that passion and the enthusiasm and the excitement. I was talking to a founder the other day and they said, you're going to think I'm crazy. And I was like, I like it already, because, if you're thinking big and you're thinking out of the box, you're much more likely to have something that's going to be successful and no one else would have thought to do it before.
And that is the reality, isn't it? Often the biggest ideas, invariably, if it's truly innovative, if it's truly groundbreaking, if it's truly going to be vast, it's going to sound ridiculous at the beginning because it's going to change how the world works. And to do that means you're going to subvert the status quo. You're going to subvert how people are thinking. Conventional wisdom is wisdom. It is the norm. And if you're going against it, you're going to look stupid at the beginning. And you have to have that trait, don't you, as a startup founder, that you're willing to look stupid. Mm-hmm. You're willing to fail and fall over, because otherwise you're just doing something that's already been done. It's going to be a Me Too copy. It's just going to be the same old, same old.
Well, and the resilience to get back up again when people consistently tell you that you're crazy or it's not going to work. So I think not easy and taxing, but I think, if you really have that passion, then you'll be able to persevere through the hardship.
And I wonder if partly that passion underpins the communication as well, that if you're not particularly passionate about something, then perhaps you don't have the motivation to find the words and the ways of communicating, because when you are passionate about something, you want people to understand, and when they're not understanding, you keep on finding, what do I have to say to convince you that this thing is really important or really interesting? And so it kind of gets you to keep on going and keep finding those words.
So talking about crazy things and maybe getting laughed at, or maybe not, I hear you did some stand-up comedy recently.
So what you're saying is I didn't get laughed at because I wasn't very funny. But yeah, you're right. I did a bit of stand-up. I tried it. I was pushed into it, somewhat bamboozled into it. But yeah, you're right. It was a challenge. It was about stepping into a completely unfamiliar context and being challenged to find ways of communicating in that different way. And it's something I've never done before. And I was challenged on it because we expect startup founders to stand on a stage, pitch to hundreds of investors, something they've never done before. And Les Carr here at the university basically pushed me and guilt-tripped me, saying you can't do that to other people and not be willing to do it yourself. So there we go. You're going to have to do my event, which is a stand-up science event. So really tricky. But it was great. It was a really good challenge to do it. What I found actually is then in trying to think of a routine, a standard routine, never done this before, you've got to find some kind of source of content. There's got to be something that motivates you around what you're going to talk about. And I really struggled with, okay, where do I start? How do I talk about startups, talk about founders? And actually for me, I found that the topic that I really did want to talk about was about old white guys and the problem of old white guys in the tech industry, in startups, and how historically it's so skewed towards us old white guys, and I'm really conscious that I'm one of them. And so how much am I part of the problem? How much can I be part of the solution? So yeah, having that kind of motivation, I suppose, pushed me into trying to make that into something funny. Whether or not it actually worked, well, who knows? But
we laugh at you all the time. So.
Yes, but not when I'm doing a stand-up routine. And yeah, it was a really good experience for a different environment, different kind of audience, communicating in a different way. And that it is challenging, and it is hard, and that can be nerve-wracking, and it can challenge you, but it also opens up a different way of communicating. And for startup founders, being able to communicate in different ways to different audiences is absolutely essential, whether it's customers, employees, or investors. Like classic investor pitch is one thing, but just talking to people who may want to partner with you is absolutely essential. And so it's a really good, it's a really good challenge for people. And I would encourage any of the startup founders that we're working with to give it a go. They may not be very funny, it may not be the best thing. And, I wasn't particularly great, but it's a good discipline to kind of think about how you communicate something really simply and quickly and easily to make it accessible. So it was good fun. I'm not sure how soon I'll be doing it again, but I'm looking forward to you doing it. So that'll be fun.
There's one this month, actually. I'll put your name down for it.
So, Alice, look, you're routinely meeting aspiring startup founders every day here across campus, lots of them deeply technical. Often they probably struggle to communicate with you and communicating their idea to you. What have been some of your experiences meeting first-time aspiring founders?
I think when someone says to you, I'm doing this thing, and you say, okay, tell me about it. And they kind of start with like the really deep technical information, which obviously if you're not an expert in that field, I instantly just don't know what you're talking about. And then because of that, you're disinterested. So, I think it's about trying to help people understand that you need to tell people why is this important? Why does it matter? And ultimately, why would people, maybe pay money for this? Because I think lots of, universities full of academics, and lots of these people are very used to communicating in certain ways. So academic conferences where you are showing graphs, you're talking about technical data, and that is what it's for. So then when you take that away and you want someone to talk about it in a different context, it can be quite difficult for them to adapt to that. We see it, preparing pitches for demo day, where people, when they initially come with their slides, 30 slides long with graphs with tiny font on and all of these things. And that, okay, no investor is ever going to want to look at that. And so trying to help them to change the way they think about it, to enable them to actually communicate effectively to a different audience, and more of a general audience as well.
Yeah, and we see it all the time. So I sit on the faculty's IP panel, as you know, and so we're getting disclosures of inventions from these incredibly talented researchers and academics across the university, particularly in science and physical science and engineering. And so often they've got these incredible things that they've done, but it's wrapped in all of this opaque language, or they're really, as you say, diving into these deeply technical kind of graphs and tables around what they're doing, and they haven't talked about why it's important, who really cares about this thing. It's like Simon Sinek talks about start with why, and the great brands start with why, the reason for existing. And I guess that's such a challenge for people to translate from, I'm really passionate about this thing that I've been doing in the lab for the last 20 years into, this is why it makes people's lives better. This is why it's going to change this, that, or the other.
That segues really nicely into one of the questions we had from our podcast fans. So actually, if you have a small business, how do you know if there's potential for that to become a highly scalable startup?
It's a really good question. And there is such a big difference between small business, doing something maybe that's proven, understood, and you're just deploying it into a particular market, through to a startup, which we always see as really it's an experiment to find a compelling value proposition and a compelling business model that can scale. It's tied to that aspirational, trying to go big, trying to impact and change the world, and doing something that hasn't been tried before, perhaps isn't proven. And one of the differences, I think, is about that scale of ambition. So there's lots of things you can do at a small scale, but it's not scalable. It's not repeatable. It's not automated. So if you think of doing things like consultancy services, I can do services and maybe I can charge a lot of money for my time to someone else. That's great. And that can build a small business and a decent business that could be valuable. To scale that, I need to keep on recruiting more and more people to do the same services. It's much more difficult to scale that in an exponential way. But if there's ways that I can turn maybe the advice that I'm giving, the kind of input that I'm giving on consultancy, and turn that into an automated product that I could serve online, suddenly then there's a route to that going from a small business into a startup. What I don't know is, will people interact with the consulting provision, but through an online resource? Do they actually want to speak to me as a person, or can I just give them the content in an automated on-demand way? That's the test. If you can prove that and you can repeat it at scale, suddenly then that can go from a small business into a big startup. So yeah, where we've been saying like startups are all about experiments. Actually, I'm pretty sure one of the questions that came through, and I'm just going to grab this so I can have a look, was around kind of getting feedback on startup ideas and how you navigate people potentially stealing the idea. What have been your experiences around that, Alice?
Yeah, so we hear that a lot when people say stealing your idea, because when you say you have to go and talk to potential customers, you're going to be telling them all your ideas and then they'll run away with it. But actually, that's not quite the right question, because when you're speaking to customers, actually, if you're telling them your idea up front, then they're probably going to lie to you. So there's a very good book, The Mum Test. And the idea is that, obviously, if you tell your idea to your mum, she's going to tell you it's great because she's your mum. But the same is actually true with most people, because if you take them your idea and you say, oh, I have this mug. Do you like my mug? And you're like, yeah, it's a perfectly good mug. There's nothing wrong with it. But actually, you don't want a mug. You know, you're looking for a glass. And so it isn't actually fitting your purpose, but that's not what I've asked you. You know, what I should ask you is, what's the problem you're currently experiencing with drinking water? And you say, I haven't got anything to put it in. And it's this idea that you try and ask them about their problems and you get them to tell you what they need. And then you can think, actually, I have a solution that will solve their problem. But you don't want to frame it up front by giving it away too early. So really, you shouldn't be telling anyone your ideas. So there's no way that they should be stealing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like one of the phrases that I like is this idea that one of the biggest wastes in the startup ecosystem is brilliant people working on mediocre startup ideas. And the more you can do to try to screen out for, is this a mediocre idea or is this a potentially amazing idea, so that you're not wasting potentially years of your life working on something that's basically a bit mediocre. One of the other questions we've got here, Alice, is someone asking, I'm trying to solve a problem where the end user doesn't have much disposable income. It's maybe like students, charities, non-profits. And how would I raise money and investment for that kind of proposition?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, because it depends where you're looking for your money. So when you're thinking about venture capital, these kind of investors are looking for quite specific things, basically a return on their investment. So they're going to be looking for you to exit at some point so they get their money back, hopefully with some profit. And so they're not going to be the kind of people that would potentially want to do that, because if you're not going to be making huge amounts of money, neither will they. But there are other people that are looking towards more societal goods and social impact.
And it's so important, isn't it, that you get that alignment between what an investor's looking for, what you're looking for. And sometimes that's a mix of you're trying to change the world and you're trying to make money. And the investors, some are just interested in making the money and some are interested in changing the world. And if you're trying to change the world, well, you need investors that are motivated by both the money and the changing the world, not just one.
Yeah, you're absolutely very lucky if it falls into both of those categories. That, you know, I think there's I'm sure you've used it before. There's a nice Venn diagram of all of these things, which is things that you're passionate about, things that you're good at, things that will potentially, help something in the world, and things that are going to make money. And if you can find the sweet spot where something in the middle of all of those, then that's the golden spot.
The Japanese phrase ikigai,
yes,
that talks about that sense of purpose and that alignment.
So one of the other questions we've had, or we had a couple actually around this theme, is that if someone has a friend that has a startup and they're asking for investment, what do you need to ask them, or what do you need to know about it before you can kind of risk your money?
So my view typically at this point would always be like OPM. It's all about other people's money. Startups are incredibly risky, like most fail. And so investing in startups is incredibly risky. Most of the investments will fail. The successful investors at that stage, and there's many, and they've made lots of money, but they've made a lot of money by being able to invest across a wide portfolio of lots of startups. What you don't want to be is in the position where either you've invested in one of your friends and it's like your only investment is this one startup. And if the money goes south, you really are going to struggle. It's going to have a big financial impact on you. You need to be in a position where you can write that money off. If it ever comes back, great, it's a bonus. But you recognize it's probably not going to come back. And so the friends and family rounds, I think, are inherently risky. I've seen it many times where the relational breakdown that you have by raising money from your friends and family when things become difficult, suddenly you then get all the differences come out and the expectations perhaps aren't met. The alignment isn't there. And the tragedy is you're genuinely trying to get a startup launched and you end up with your closest friends and family. Suddenly you've got the friction there as well. And actually launching a startup is incredibly hard. You need all the family and friends support you can get. So keeping that separate from the money, I just think is a really good thing, both for you as a founder or for you as a potential friend investing in a founder. It's fraught with danger. One of the tests would be like if your startup idea isn't compelling enough to raise from a seasoned investor, then ask yourself the question, is the startup idea good enough in and of itself? Now, I know that there are many challenges to that, many hurdles around underrepresented groups and barriers that people face. So it's not a simple answer that if your startup idea is good enough, then you can raise money. But it is a key test, and always looking for external sources and people where it is a dispassionate, not emotional connection, so that then if and when things go wrong, you're not going to be losing one of your closest friends. Great. Thanks, Alice. I think that's all the questions that we've got time to cover today. So thanks for joining us for this episode. Make sure you look out for the next one that's going to be coming soon. Head over to futureworlds.com, follow us on our social channels, subscribe to this podcast. And if you've got any comments or questions, then add them in there and get in touch with us.